Hello and welcome to Keeping It Rural. I am really excited to be here with Becca and Lindsay, along with a young lady that I have known a really long time. And I think her mama is just fantastical. I love her. So recently, Martha won a really cool honor at the North American International Livestock Expo. And I follow Martha on social media and I saw that this is what happened with her. And all of a sudden, we were like, we need to have this girl. We need to have this girl on Keeping It Real. She's going to speak to so many young people, especially when it comes to speaking and public speaking and giving reasons. And, you know, as a past teacher, I know a lot of young people get really irritated having to do those things as a requirement in class or for an FFA contest or 4-H or whatever it may be. So Martha, first of all, tell us about you and give us kind of the dime version of who you are, because I know you could probably speak for a half an hour just about that.
Yes, I grew up on my family's farm in southeast Minnesota in a little town called Hayfield, which no one really knows where it's at. But I always describe that I'm right in between Hormel and the Mayo Clinic, and usually that gives a pretty good identification of where I'm at. So I grew up, and my dad and his brothers had crops as well as some hogs, and then a feed yard with dairy steers. And that's actually how I got involved in 4-H, as I showed dairy steers growing up when I was younger with my siblings. Finally, when my sister was old enough to join FFA and she got involved in SAEs, she decided that she wanted to do something more than just dairy steers, and she wanted to venture into actual breeds of cattle. And so we ended up starting and showing Semitol cattle because of that. And that kind of changed the trajectory of what we did growing up throughout high school. So we got very involved in the Minnesota Junior Semitol Association, the American Junior Semitol Association, and we still have some of those cows that we got 10 years ago today are still with us. And then in high school, I was heavily involved in FFA. I was a region officer for 2 years. I was involved in career development events and in leadership development events, and went to national conventions several years. And through all of this, I got intertwined into livestock judging, and then eventually decided I wanted to do that throughout college. So I attended a junior college in Kansas called Butler Community College. And I was there for 2 years on the judging team, got my associate's degree. And now I'm a senior at South Dakota State, where I continued my involvement on the judging team. And I'm an animal science and meat science student there.
Very cool. I know that you've had a lot of accolades throughout the years, and we want to talk about all of these things that you've earned. You've worked really hard.
Thank you.
So first of all, let's focus a little bit on the general livestock judging thing, because I think that there's a lot of kids out there and a lot of young people that love to judge, whether it's cattle or general livestock or dairy or horses. I was actually in consumer judging in 4-H when I was a kid, and it made me, just like reasons in anything, it makes you very objective. Right? It makes you think more about things you're choosing. Tell us a little bit about the honor that you had at the North American International Livestock Expo. Tell us about your team, how you guys did, but particularly focus on your reasons and focus on how you've grown in giving reasons and why that's been important for you.
Yeah, so I would say that my introduction to reasons, if you were to tell me when after my first judging contest that I would have stuck with it this long and that I would have won at the national contest and been named high individual in reasons, I would have thought you were completely crazy. Because at my first contest, it was actually at a AJSA regional Semitol show in South Dakota, and you're required to compete in these educational contests. And I didn't want to do them, but I knew I had to. And I was very little. I think I would have been like 12 at this time. And I gave my first set of reasons on the wrong class. So it wasn't even like a reasons class. I gave it on the wrong class. After that, like, it traumatized me so much. Like, I was so scared to like judge again. I was like, I don't want to do that. Like, I messed up last time. I'm not going to do that. That's scary. Like, I don't want to be a part of that. And it kept me away for maybe a year. I don't think I like ended up sticking it out that long, because my sister at the time, she was going to a lot of judging contests, and she finally drugged me along. And I don't know why I agreed to it. I think it's because all of my 4-H and FFA friends were doing it as well. So I was like, I didn't want to be the odd man out. And so I ended up going, and I think at my first contest when I was a junior, there couldn't have been more than probably 10 kids, but I was like fifth in reasons. And I was like, oh my God, like this is so exciting. So just from there, like I continued to go to judging contests, and eventually a lot of the contests I ended up going to in high school, I would go as an individual for some of them if they were outside of the state of Minnesota or things. I remember I had my mom drive me through a blizzard to go to Iowa Beef Expo so that I could compete in their 4-H and FFA judging contest because I thought it was so serious at the time. I did end up winning reasons eventually one year at that contest, but reasons just became something I really enjoyed. I don't know where like the shift happened. I think for me, it was always something that I knew I could control the outcome of, because with placing classes, like I didn't know how, the committee would see it, how they would place it, but I knew that I could dictate my score in a reasons room. And so I think that's where I saw the most reward in the effort I put forth. I knew that when I put effort into my reasons that I ended up doing well. So that really motivated me and pushed me. And I think all my experience in public speaking allowed reasons, or at least the presentation aspect of them, to come off very naturally for me, which is something that I was very blessed with, because a lot of other aspects of livestock judging did not come off as naturally as some of my peers that I've competed with and been on teams with. But I really enjoyed both my teams at Butler Community College. That was like my first big like leap of faith at that time when I was going there. They were the national team of the year for several years prior, a very prestigious, and they still are a very prestigious junior college livestock judging program. And when I saw all of my future teammates going there, I was like, oh, I'm like not in the same league as they are. I'm from Minnesota. I have never went or competed at a national 4-H or FFA judging contest. So it was very intimidating for me to go there. But I remember I always told myself, I was like, if I'm going to go and I'm going to try to do livestock judging at a competitive level, I knew I wanted to do it at a place that would really push me to grow and it would challenge myself. And even if I didn't end up marking or being one of the kids that got to compete at those contests, I knew that I could be a part of a very competitive program and it would make me better in the end. And it really did. And I was very blessed to have been able to mark at that junior college and be able to represent Butler. And my coach helped me a lot with just figuring out my style. It was very different than a lot of my peers and a lot of the kids on my team, because everything I said was very simplified compared to what was probably more common amongst my competitors. And I was told in senior college that simpler sets typically end up being more successful or end up getting more rewarded there at the end, which is funny because I kind of did a complete shift of my reasons, and they got a lot more detailed when I got to senior college, and were probably a lot longer than what some coaches would probably allow for their kids to be giving. So I was glad that my coach at South Dakota State gave me a lot of creative freedom in the things that I said and allowed me to be as long as I needed to be. But yeah, so reasons have always been really important to me. I'm not sure where that shift came. It was just something I always really enjoyed. And I always had a goal. Every contest, it was like, just try to get into the top 10 in reasons. I can't dictate whether I'll win reasons or not, just try to get in the top 10. And I was very fortunate to achieve that numerous times. And the national contest, like, again, trying not to set any expectations. I had goals, of course, and winning reasons at the national contest was one of them that I've had for a very long time. And so when they called my name, I was a bit in shock. Like, they went from 10th to first and they kept listing off people's names. And I'm just sitting there. And usually I get pretty nervous when they're naming off the top 10 in reasons, but I wasn't very nervous this time. I think I was like, just don't have any expectations, because then you won't get let down if like you don't achieve something, which is probably a bad way to view things. But at the time, that's how I was processing everything. And then they named me a high individual, and it was a very like shocking moment. I don't think it's really ever like set in properly, but I also had several like junior college teammates that were in the top 10 with me. So it was very special to be able to succeed with them at the last contest in senior college there. And I was very close with my senior college teammates as well. I know the transition from junior college to senior college was a little bit tough in trying to figure out where to go, but our team was very close. Like, we hang out all the time. We all live together, and we all live like in the same like apartment complex. So we are always together. And I really couldn't imagine being on a team with anyone else than the individuals there at South Dakota State. That's a very long response into all the little.
No, but it's a really
everything.
good one. And you
Yeah.
touched on something that I wish I could go back and teach my younger self. And I always really push it on youth that, are going through the same thing you exactly described. You tried something, you failed at it, never thought you were going to go back and do it. And now look at you, right? Walk through that process a little bit and talk about, the fear you feel and the failure, and sometimes people talking, you hear comments. I think that's really important because, you've come a long ways from where your story started.
I would say there was a lot of like self-doubt. And I think that was like a common theme throughout like my livestock judging experience, because it very much, especially when you get to a more competitive level, everyone always says like it's truly just a mental game. Like, who can go throughout that entire contest of 12 classes, not talk to anyone, and only be inside your head, and then get through the rest of the afternoon and you don't talk to anyone. It's just everything's all in your head. And so early on, like, I think the reason after I gave that wrong set and I didn't want to go again is just like self-doubt that I would make the same mistake again, or that the last time caused me so much anxiety. Why would I want to do that again? So I don't know exactly why I chose to do it again. I think it really comes back to like surrounding yourself with people who see the best in you. And I know that my sister, she really enjoyed it. And so when I had that bad first experience, she obviously didn't want that to be my last experience that I had with it. So having people who are able to encourage you and support you along the way really makes a difference. And I really accredit my sister to starting all of this, because I know I looked up to her so much when I was little, and there would have been no reason that if I didn't look up to her, why I would continue to try and do something that she was doing. It was pretty much just because I wanted to be like her, essentially. I know every younger sibling wants to be like their older ones or wants to try and prove themselves.
Oh, I don't know if that's always. You had a really good one.
Yeah. And so that really helped me throughout the early stages. And then in college, like same thing, there was a lot of self-doubt of, am I good enough to be here? Am I good enough to see success? There was a lot of like negative self-talk that I would have with myself. And I was very fortunate, like when deciphering where to go to school, I knew I wanted to have a coach that I could build like a personal connection with, someone who would be very invested in me, not just for what I could do for them in a judging arena, but what I could do for them just in life and what they could do for me in my life as well. And Taylor Frank at Butler was incredible. The fact that he saw so much potential in me and was able to pour so much into me, I think really helped me. If I didn't have as good of a junior college experience that I did, I don't think I would have seen as much success that I had in senior college. Those steps early on really did help. And then going into senior college, same thing. Like, there was a different level of pressure. In junior college, I was like, I really have to, perform for my team. I want to live up for my team. It was exactly the same in senior college, but I almost felt like it was a different level of pressure of your teammates are 100% relying on you, like you're relying on them. And so I felt it with a lot more intensity going to SDSU, and just how much more competitive I think senior college is. Usually a lot of the kids that are in it that were competitive in junior college, they've only gotten better. There are kids that maybe weren't as competitive in junior college that now they're under the right coaching and they're excelling. So there's a lot of shifts that happen in senior college. And I think the pressure can get to be a lot. And so working with my coach, I would talk through him. I was like, I'm putting a ton of pressure on myself. I remember days leading up to the national contest, I was talking to him and saying, I was just second at Kansas City. I know I have the ability to be competitive at this final contest, and I feel like it's going to eat me alive to the point where I'm not able to be successful. And so having really like vulnerable conversations with my coaches helped me a lot, so that they could know where I was mentally at, so that they knew how to coach and assist me along the way. So I guess the big takeaway of all the self-doubt or maybe the negative things that happen along the way is making sure that your circle and the people who are leading you are really good people, and then you won't get too far off the path. So really making sure that the people you're around are good, supportive, encouraging people. So
Well, and it sounds to me, Martha, that it's really important that people understand. Number one, no one expects you to be perfect,
yeah.
even in a college level. And that as a young person, I mean, I'm older and it's hard to be vulnerable. Like it's hard to admit, like, I'm stressed out. It's hard to admit I need help, and it sounds to me like you embrace that. And I think
Yes.
that's important for people to think about, especially young
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
I think that you being that vulnerable and sharing both the success story and that self-doubt doesn't just happen once. It's not something you just overcome. It's something that hits us all the time, right? It's something that's continuous. And so it's how do you deal with it and how do you deal with that situation that makes people successful? And so that's a huge thing.
And I think that's really, really important. Your age, it's very hard to know your circle because you want to be liked by everybody. You want to be friends with everybody. And you like nailed that on the head at your age. I'm very impressed.
Yeah.
Because I'm still learning it in my 40s.
I think it's a lifelong process.
Yeah.
Martha, let's talk about the technical side of things here too. You mentioned that some people are just naturals at this. Some people are not. I remember when I started doing dairy judging and trying at livestock judging and looking at one set of animals and then another set of animals. I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm really good at this one. I just can't do this one. Have you seen some of your fellow judging mates get better at that type of stuff, or have you seen that those that are naturals tend to still excel more? How does that work in terms of the ebb and flow of success on your team?
I would say not just on my team, but in like the entire circuit of livestock judging, there are several people that I've witnessed that I think they have an abundance of just natural talent. But I do think that like hard work and how much you put into livestock judging directly determines how successful you end up being. You can have that natural talent and those natural abilities, but when you're practicing and working out as much as collegiate teams are, the natural talent that you have isn't enough, truthfully, to just be able to go in and do things flawlessly. People are constantly fine-tuning their craft and becoming better at things. And so I would say that would be very apparent. Obviously, you need to have an instinctual ability to do things. And we worked a lot with Brady at the end of the year. He said, coming up to Louisville, he's like, a lot of these, you'll go up to classes and it'll just be instinctual. You'll know what to do because you've done it a million times, or you've seen a class dynamic that's similar, or that kind of animal is just wrong. Their kind doesn't work in production. I definitely did notice that, which was very odd because in junior college, you're still walking up, or I at least was walking up to classes with a little bit of nerves of like, okay, so how does this get placed? And towards the fall, it just definitely became a lot easier from a placing perspective, simply because of all the work that we put in previously. So going back to like the natural talent, I think every individual has some degree of natural talent, but it's just how much you spend fine tuning it, because then there at the end is where it can really just become instinctual in those ways. But I will say, like, for me personally, there were always species that I was way more comfortable with. There was just ones that I'd walk up to and I knew I could make a certain call, or I could place things a certain way and I knew I would be safe because I was just that much more comfortable in studying and analyzing them compared to other species. And so I think that definitely does play a role. I will say, like in junior college, goats always made me very nervous. I don't know why. It was like we didn't judge an abundance of them in 4-H and FFA. And so I didn't have a lot of exposure to them. So in
they were pretty
college,
new into the general
they were
livestock
still pretty
project.
new in stuff. And so in junior college, I was like always freaked out over them. And our first national contest that I got to mark at, I like completely messed up the goat class that was supposed to be really easy. And I ended up dropping like 16 points on it. And I believe our team was second by like 16 points. So I was like, oh, like maybe if you knew how to place the goats, like that wouldn't have happened and you wouldn't have to be kind of bummed on your van ride home. But at SDSU, like I noticed a big shift in being way more comfortable in how I placed goat classes and judging contests. So there definitely is room for growth. I would say those who are involved in judging and are like, I just can't figure this species out. I just don't understand them. I don't get it. To a degree, like there's going to be a learning curve in them. Like it's going to be hard to understand them, especially if you're not around them as much. Like for me, I didn't grow up showing pigs. So pigs didn't come nearly as natural to me as they do to kids who are around pigs every single day. And so what I did on those species that I wasn't nearly as comfortable with is I tried to really immerse myself in that particular industry. I utilized Walton webcasting a lot, and I watched previous shows to see how judges were working through these large classes, what they were talking about specifically to enhance my terminology. And I really do think that helped me tremendously in my pig evaluation skills or hog evaluation skills throughout the years. It is hard. Those species that don't come as easy definitely can be challenging, but you just have to, I guess, just push through it, because once you start figuring it out, they become way more fun than even some of the other species that you'll end up working through.
So Martha, could you do us and everyone listening a huge favor? If you were going to go through those species, like what are a couple things for each one that were things that you didn't really know you should look for, but now you do, or like things that are kind of trends that you really picked up in the last few years?
Yeah, I would say this fall specifically, our first contest, I was like way in over my head and I messed up like a lot of stuff. And Brady helped me simplify things so much. And I think that it could help other people that may be listening as well. But essentially, on a class that I wasn't just instinctually getting, like I mentioned previously, I ranked each animal on quality and their function. And I did that across all species. And it really helped me if there was a class where I was like, I just don't understand this. So it helped me work through some of those challenges. Quality, it's kind of hard to describe. I would say it's probably an all-encompassing kind of factor determination thing. And basically, it's just an instinctual thing of is that animal high quality compared to the other ones in the class, or are they high quality individually as well? And then from a function perspective, that's a little bit more specific and actually has some defining features to it. So I guess for cattle, specifically breeding cattle, things that would determine function would be like their structure and skeletal assembly, how they're made, are they sound, their body volume and their ability to maintain flesh. Those would all be things involved in their ability to function and basically just be valuable in production, essentially. Same thing on the market side. Basically, for any market animal, instead of their function, I would evaluate basically their composition. So how much muscle do they have? Is their composition correct? Are they too fat? Are they too lean and need more to them? What's their skeletal base width? Some of those factors I always considered into what I had as like my terminal ranking for those market classes. In sheep and goats, the quality and function columns for the breeding side of things got to be a little bit more challenging. I feel like there's more weight on their quality rather than their function, since most of those species, I guess the deviation of function isn't as big compared to species like cattle. Like if a cow is not sound and is entirely too straight, they will not be able to do well in production. Whereas in sheep and goats, you can maybe get away with them not being perfect. I'm not saying I like really straight livestock, but for sheep and goats, things that are really trendy for them would be like round rib cages and making sure that their underlines and chests are really shallow. And of course, we all like them to be kind of tricked out in terms of their look, a thin neck that's nice and high attaching and shaggy, and stout legs to them always helps as well. So those things were really trendy in sheep and goats. And in cattle, I would say cattle are pretty timeless across kind of the things that we would always study for. You want them to have some balance, but again, those function things of soundness. I would always evaluate cattle of big bodied, good hind leg. And then if we can throw balance on top of that, essentially was my mantra for judging breeding cattle. I just tried to keep things as simple as I could with them. And then for hogs, I would say the big thing within hogs is really like density and stoutness, toe size. That's really huge in terms of the hog industry. And it's fun when they come a little bit hairier too as well. So those were kind of the trendy things that we got to discuss a little bit throughout my college career. But yeah, basically basing them off of the quality aspects and then the function or what they can bring to the table from a terminal perspective.
Martha, you mentioned and you alluded to the work that goes into being a collegiate judger. Can you explain how much work goes into that? You said you've seen a million classes, you've done a million sets of reasons. What does that look like? How much time are you actually putting in on a typical week or a typical day?
In junior college, when we came in as freshmen, we allocated our schedules so that we didn't have classes on Fridays. So we would work out and go to different farms and evaluate their livestock all day on Friday and then all day on Saturday. And then we always got those Sundays off to be able to go to church and do our homework and catch up on things. And then throughout the week, like a Monday or a Wednesday or a Tuesday and Thursday, 2 times a week, we would give sets of reasons from that previous weekend. So that's what a basic normal like practice schedule looked like for me in junior college. But then throughout the fall, you're going to contests basically every other week or every week for about like a month and a half. There's kind of a big run there, end of September into October of contests like every weekend. And then sophomore year, you're going to all of the national contests that are available. And so those include longer trips. So you're usually leaving about 5 days at minimum to the national contests like the American Royal or Louisville Cattlemen's Congress in Denver. So all of those are intertwined throughout the year as well, in addition to just our basic practices that we had. In senior college, it was very similar. We had classes on Fridays. It was a little bit harder to do our schedules the way that we did in junior college, but we would practice like Friday evening, all day Saturday. And then I would say about 3 times a week, we would come in and do reasons. And in addition to this, before school started, we had about a week of practices every single day, starting in the morning, getting done at like 8 or 9. So there was a lot that was involved in that. And I know the juniors that have just started now, they stayed a week after finals and were working out and practicing throughout the week. So there's a lot that's involved in it. I don't know if I could accurately depict how many hours was spent in it, but it was essentially basically a full-time job that you did, like in addition to school. Anytime I wasn't doing homework, I was probably working on sets or packing for a contest, unpacking for a contest, whatever it may be. At a collegiate level, there's a lot that goes into it.
I just think about like my students in high school and how they try to balance being in 3 sports. And we're going to fit in this general livestock thing, but I can only practice once a week. You think about the priorities and the balance of time. Do you have any advice or tips and tricks that you've picked up throughout your years and experiences that you've found work well for you, or ways that you've realized, you know what, this is my passion, this is what I'm going to do to make it a priority?
I would say, like for me, livestock judging was always a priority. In fact, like so much that it was a priority that I would put other things off that were probably maybe a bit more important, because I was like, well, we're leaving for this trip, I'll take care of that when I get back. So I would say really the way that I delegated my time was just about based on the amount of passion I had for it. So in high school, I was very similar. I had numerous practices involved in FFA, all of that, and things got very busy and hectic. But for me, it was always, I cared about it. So it didn't really feel like that much of a sacrifice in a sense. And so that always helped me delegate my time. And I'm someone that I will tend to procrastinate if I don't have like scheduled times. And so actually being so busy with judging helped me a lot, because it's like, well, this is the only time you have to work on this. So you have to get it done before you go. So just being disciplined to knowing your time constraints, how much it takes you to do something, so that you can make sure that you have time to fulfill those passions as well. And I know from a high school perspective, kids may just be doing it because they're trying it out, or honestly, they may be doing it because they were forced to, or their advisor told them to do something. And in those scenarios, I know it can be really hard for them to show up to a practice and really give the same amount of effort as maybe some of their other teammates. And so to that, I would always challenge kids and say, essentially in this event, it is individually based on your score, and you'll put up a score that you want, but you are doing things for your teammates. And so if you're not putting in the same kind of effort, then you're letting your teammates and your friends down. And so keeping it in perspective of it's not just a me activity. This is something that I'm doing that can help my teammates as well at the end of the day.
Martha, some people are just starting out, maybe judging, or they're just trying to improve. Can you give some tips on number one, like how to set up your notebook? And then second, like what is your favorite general structure for giving reasons?
Yes, I would say that it can vary for each individual. I know just on my own team that our notebooks all looked entirely different, and my handwriting was atrocious. So no one could ever even read my notebook, anyways, when we were trying to compare notes working on sets with one another. So I would say that for kids that are just starting out, is that there's a lot of different ways that you can set up a judging notebook, and a lot of different ways you can find online, or ways your coaches or your advisors will tell you how to set it up. But set it up in a way that makes sense to you, because if it's a system that you're struggling with, it's not going to make judging very fun for you if you're like stumbling through your notebook throughout a contest. So I know the way I set it up in high school was very different to how I set it up in college, but I essentially had like my regular steno pad, and I would split the page essentially into half, or have like a top quarter, 2/3 of the page just dedicated to the notes that I was going to take on each individual animal. And so I know in a typical setup, they'll tell you to just have a very thin line with basically your broad IDs of each animal. I never liked that because it took me like a little bit to get my perspective on each animal. Like, how was this animal perceived by me and potentially by other people? So I wanted to have all of those details easy and accessible to me before I was able to determine a placing. So I left a bigger portion to just be able to write down my chicken scratch notes of everything that I observed during that class. And then the bottom half, I had kind of a reasons format, but I never actually wrote out my reasons in that area. I just wrote big picture words in each box. And I think early on, that's a really important thing to do. When I work with 4-H and FFA kids, I always tell them, like, what is the big picture thing? Because it's so easy to get caught up in a lot of the other details that don't really matter. So putting in those big picture things into each box. First box would be my class winner discussion, what I was going to talk about the class winner. And I would put, why does she win? Maybe she wins because she's the best balanced. So I would have balanced as my big picture. And then below it, I would put the supporting details that would support her being, the class winner from the big picture perspective. And then as you transition into that grant and criticism box, wherever you want to put it, I know some people do like 3 boxes in a row, or some people do a box and then a box and a bigger box. Whatever you want to do for a grant or criticism box, I did the same thing, a big picture and then supporting details that would support why they had that advantage or why they had that criticism. And then repeating that for each of the pairs. So you'll have a top pair, a middle pair, and a bottom pair, but they should all be set up the same way, kind of that opener winner discussion on top, and then the grant criticism. Middle pair, it's just flipped. Why does that animal beat the other one in the middle pair? And then grant criticism of the other one, and then continuing that down throughout it. And then I had to like compose my thoughts further after doing my big picture thing. And I always wrote out my sets. I know some kids don't like doing that. It's not even something that I would encourage, because I know some people struggle with, I write it down like that, I have to say it like that. And if I don't say it like that, I'm going to be messed up. And that's totally okay. I knew several of my teammates struggled with the same thing. So they would just do like their big picture details and would just work it up in their heads or in their minds while they were walking around, pacing, getting ready for reasons. So I would say it's a lot of trial and error to figure out what works best for each kid, but just trying to, think about the things that they're doing and what makes sense to them and what's the most user friendly for them. It doesn't matter what their notebook looks like. They're not going to get judged off of how they set things up, as long as it's effective for them.
Do you have a favorite term that you use during reasons, or a fallback that you enjoy, or one that you're always like, yep, this is my go-to?
I would say throughout the 4 years, we would always call it like plug and chug, essentially. And that's why I spent a lot of time writing up my sets in practice because I was like, oh, if this scenario ever happens in a contest, I have a great, very well thought out phrasing for how to describe it. Because while each animal is different, some of the themes in a class can transpose to one another. Don't know if I had like a one that I used all the time. I'd say in cattle reasons, I would usually talk about their body shape and their hind leg just about every time. I would say, should allow them to be reliable in production. I used that a lot on different sets for bull sets and for heifer sets as well. I don't know if I had like a truly a fallback term that I used all the time, but I would say that if you read all of the sets that I had, they would sound very similar in ways, just in the way that I crafted and organized my sets. A lot of the terms could have been different. The ideas behind them would have been very similar.
Yeah, an artistic touch per se.
Yes. And it's so funny because each of my teammates, we don't sound the same. We all had very different styles. And that's what I really enjoyed about my team, is because it was the ability to bounce ideas off of other individuals was really helpful, because we all had different approaches to things, different ways of saying things. But at the same time, there were things that my teammates could say and I would be like, oh, I love that. Like, that was so good. And I would try to say it and I'm like, that just didn't sound nearly as good. Like that, it just didn't like fit my style.
Is there room for like a ton of creativity in reasons, or do you feel like people should keep it simple and keep to structure?
I would say when you're first starting off, I would keep it as simple as you can, because when you're first like developing your skills in livestock judging, no one can argue with like the hard facts that you present to them. So if you keep it simple to, again, those big picture things that matter, you'll always score well or have a very safe and respectable reason score. So that would be my advice when you're first starting out. That's how I kept my sets in junior college. They were very simplistic. They were very straightforward, to the point, and oftentimes probably lacked a bit of creativity compared to my teammates. And I'd say the longer you do it and the more comfortable you get with things, that's when you can allow the creative touches to come into play in a set of reasons. But when you're starting off, I think simple is usually best.
When you say creative touches, what would be an example of a creative touch?
That's always like hard for me, because even in like the college realm, I think there's can't think of the word, but negative like notation of that college kids just put a bunch of like fluff in their sets, like stuff that doesn't matter. And I would say for me, the creative touch came in, how can you correlate two ideas into something? So a lot of times when you're giving a set to someone, you can provide them with A and B, but if you don't tell them that equals C, they may not understand. And I know that sounds odd, but for example, if an animal is really flat and hard bodied and they're also straight, like you could present those facts to a reasons taker, but being able to tie in why that matters, things like those are where I would implement my creative touches. But I would say creative touch doesn't always mean unnecessary information. Usually it was stuff that conveyed an idea, conveyed a story, or proved why something had significance.
And did you find any resources or tools that you would say were very beneficial to you from a young age, even throughout your time in Texas and then at SDSU?
Yes, I would say that for me, the most helpful thing I did to really help me with livestock judging early on was I attended several livestock judging camps. I went to Iowa State's livestock judging camp. I went to South Dakota State's livestock judging camp, went to K-State's livestock judging camp numerous times. And I would say while those camps are only 2 to 3 days long, I learned more in those 2 to 3 days than I would learn a year on my own. So I essentially would always ask, my parents to go to those camps. I know there is a financial commitment behind it, but several schools are usually willing to work with you, or some of them offer, a cheaper rate earlier on when you register. They're 100% worth it. You get to work hands-on with young adults like myself that are currently in livestock judging, and they can really help you. So I would always utilize my time at those judging camps like to the fullest. I was giving as many sets a day as I could to them to get their input and to get their opinions. And then I just applied that for literally the rest of the year and tried to make as much as I could out of those livestock judging camps. They also give you a manual at all of the camps with example sets and other additional information, how to place classes, different terminology that's available. So I would highly suggest young people to take advantage if they're interested in livestock judging camp to go to those opportunities offered by universities. I also know I met several friends there at those camps that I still know today. So it's a great way to meet new people as well. That's what I really did early on. Now, though, there's been a large increase in the amount of resources available for young people on online platforms, things such as livestockjudging.com or Judging Pro or some of these other platforms that have practice classes, as well as critiques and breakdowns of why classes were placed the way that they were. Those can be really helpful as well to practice, especially in the winter time when you're snowed in and it's kind of hard to go to someone's house and look at their livestock when there's blizzards constantly.
Said all of us in Minnesota. Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
What would be your advice for a coach to coach a team of kids that, like you've talked about, like not everyone's the same and not everyone's going to do it the same, but I feel like a lot of coaches coach everyone the same. So what would be some like really quick advice that you would maybe give to coaches to help them?
I would say for coaches, the biggest thing that I would share with them is you have to have a balance of when to be patient and when to be a pusher. And I'm not able to convey the exact way to do that for each kid over this virtually, but that's really been the significance of my coaches, is when they knew when to be patient with me and when to work through things with me hands-on, and when to just flat out say, Martha, you need to work harder. That wasn't good enough. You need to keep going. So knowing and having a delicate balance of both of those aspects, I think, is crucial to coaching. And it's going to be different for every single kid. But I think both of those are really important concepts so that kids get the most out of livestock judging that they can.
Absolutely.
So Martha, that was amazing. You're a well full of knowledge. I could continue to listen to you on and
Thank you.
It's nothing like it was back when I was livestock judging. But tell us, what do you do in your daily life to keep it rural?
To keep it rural, I would say that it's hard to not keep it rural in my life when you're so embedded in agriculture. Like even when I came home from school here now on break, I'm still surrounded with agriculture, and all of my friends are involved in the livestock and agriculture industries. When I go back to school, I will be going back to classes that are all agriculture based. So it's really hard to not keep it rural, I guess, when every day there's some tie of agriculture all involved with it. And it'd be honestly very weird if there was no ag involved in my day-to-day life. So
I think that's the best answer we've had on any of our podcasts. Yeah, it's the truth.
I'm just so grateful that you took time. I think you gave a lot of hope to maybe students that are frustrated. I mean, I'm old, and I mean, you talk to yourself inside your head and tell yourself you're bad at it, or somebody told you one time you didn't do a good job and you never let it go. And it's like, no, like persevere, like you got to work hard.
Yes. Yep.
Working hard is important.
And it has been vital, I think, for a lot of these kids listening to hear the value of public speaking is just, you could never lose it. And even though it is stressful, it is difficult to work with, and you don't want to do it, you've shown that there's value to it and that you're continuing to use it and that it'll benefit you for the rest of your life.
Awesome. Well, Martha, thank you so much for joining us here on Keeping It Rural. We absolutely enjoyed all of the goodies that you brought forth. So thank you.
Thank you.
If you have any questions for Martha as you were listening, I think it'd be wise to put them in our comments, and it'd be a really cool Q&A follow-up or something with Martha where she could maybe help out or answer some of those questions that our kiddos have, and as well as those coaches.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Martha, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Thank you.
It's not a party without you there. Follow our crazy on Facebook and Instagram, and be sure to check out all episodes and extras at keepingitruralgirls.com.
Until next time, keep it rural. it's time to pour on the fire and call in the dogs. That's all, folks.